Ah yes, the infamous game of Total War Pharaoh, the biggest mess a Total War game has been in for a long while. The dramatic downfall to the massive price hike all contributed to a ton of negative reviews and negative play reception. Historical fans have been crying out for a game which just looks at the historical side of history, not Three Kingdoms with their ridiculous generals, not Troy's Mythos expansion, even though eventually that was quite good. So after the full release of Pharaoh, packaged in the Dynasties expansion, and a subsequent, some would say ironic 33% price reduction, this could have been $30 the whole time. I decided to buy the game so you didn't have to. I'm not sponsored by CA or have a ton of time to put into the game, so I'm going to share with you what the game will be like for those of us with jobs. And if you like what I say, drop me a like down below for more Total War content. First of all, music is a win. Every Total War game has to have cracking music. This game is so much better than Rome 2 music. Rome 2 music was always a little bit like, it didn't have any character to it, but of course never good as Rome 1's. Nothing will ever be. The campaign section is quite impressive. You can play as, I think, any or most of the minor factions in the game, which encourages replayability. You can also play as so many different characters in different cultures. Your characters are not immortal unless you customize your campaign, but default they're not in the Dynasties expansion. This is important because it somewhat takes away from the biggest issue that has plagued historical Total War games, which is character versus country. Are you playing as a character or are you playing as a country? Rome or the Roman Empire or the Emperor? And Total War Pharoah tackles this by bringing both sides together, which is really quite clever. Your characters can die, they can also leave a legacy. You have to make sure you've got a line of succession. An heir to the throne is far more important than the individual characters themselves and their statistics. Staying on factions for the moment, we'll come on to the problematic battle system later. It's also important to note that inside each character's faction is a new feature called Ancient Legacies. This feature is a once-in-a-game decision that will impact the rest of your experience. So for example, in the Mycene campaign, you have two options. One is an aggressive path, one is a sort of unity path. Each experience can be replayed, so that means that next Mycene campaign you can choose the other path and try a different experience, and that's a really clever way of making a campaign different, going from one to the other. However, something I don't particularly like in campaign is the forts. These are very annoying because only being able to command an army the general and not peel units off as the new system is, you find yourself unable to bypass forts without laying siege to them. You can't lay siege and also attack beyond the fort. Once you're in its field of influence, you have to attack the fort. That's the only option. You can't go anywhere else. Now you might say this is a good thing. This is how forts originally worked. They had a era of influence, but if you think logically, historically about it, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. The problem isn't that forts can't guard choke points. They absolutely can, they should. It's that they can guard choke points with minimal units. So for example, I want to attack Athens, but I can't because a fort is in the way. However, this fort's field of influence is guarded by only one unit. One unit is able to affect passage of an entire army. There is a fix for this, of course, and that is that the field of influence should change depending on how many units are inside. For example, one unit, small insignificant area, 10 units, somewhat of bigger area. The bigger the blocking force, the more influence they should have. Something I really do like about the campaign is the trade. That took me a little while to get used to. Having not played Total War Troy, I hadn't experienced the manual trade barters that you have to implement. Instead of an auto trade agreement set up by the AI, depending on what resources you have access to, you can trade manually and obtain the resources you need and sell the resources that you don't need. This makes getting out of resource dry seasons a lot more achievable. Yes, you could do the obvious, and that is conquer a new territory, or you could barter with the AI to give you additional resources. Trade the AI for lots of food, you're able to build a lot more units, therefore you're able to expand a lot more quickly. So let's move on to battles, where I found a lot more problems and unexplained game mechanics. First of all, medium-sized, or what they call ultra, isn't very big. We are topping about 70, 80, 90 men in each unit, and this is the preferred game size that the game tells you should be playing in. If you want to play extreme, which you can do, and up the level again, this gives you a lot bigger unit sizes, a lot more epic battles. I don't really see the point of smaller units, especially Total War games. It's kind of the point of the game. And also because these units are so small, they really do suffer from the biggest problem of this game, which is blobbing up. Bigger units less so, but smaller units really suffer from this, because a lot of units are melee specialists like clubmen or swordsmen, and when they attack units, they just start to draw together, and you have to add more units, and the AI adds more units to the fight, and all of a sudden it turns out into this blob versus blob, and if you don't commit, you're not going to be able to win. The AI will just win. It's far harder to hold a cohesive battle at this kind of unit level. And so you have to really have an extreme mode, which I've got on the screen right now, which is way more epic anyway. So I don't know why they didn't program the game for this size. Makes a lot more sense. But as you can see, the AI doesn't really know how to do sort of wave attacks. It's always blobbing up. It's always trying to overwhelm you with numbers. Doesn't really have the ability to attack in waves or attack specific units with specific units. It's always very much random. There are solutions to this problem for the player, which I will come to in a moment. Unit uniforms or outfits don't really help the situation. In Greece, all the units are very similar. You've got brown on green on blue. And so I find myself constantly having to hold down the spacebar to bring up the unit positioning. Otherwise, it's very hard to tell if you're being flanked. And so it's very, very difficult from a top-down position as you zoom in and then you miss other things. And so having to hold the spacebar down constantly so I can see the red or yellow colours is the only way of actually fighting a battle. And this is really game breaking. It really breaks your immersion really quickly. In a game all about historical immersion, having to constantly be blanketed by bright colour identifiers because I literally can't tell what's going on. In some cases you have blobs on blobs on blobs and it just gets ridiculous. But having brown on brown doesn't help, especially for me who's a little bit colourblind. I end up clicking random attack orders on unit flags rather than units themselves. And these unit flags are incredibly similar, brown on blue. And the biggest problem with that is not the colours, but they don't display the faction emblem. Yes, I understand what that unit is, but if it's a different colour slightly to mine, I'm going to miss that. Right? I've never had so many units get behind my line because at a quick glance as I'm surveying the battlefield, I don't recognise that that's a unit of the enemy. There's a simple way to fix this, and that is to put the faction emblem on the flag. You still have the what type of unit that is underneath, but there really needs to be a faction emblem. Otherwise, you're just going to get confused really quickly where the unit is, how many units are in there. This wasn't a problem in old Total games. We got used to it, right? In this one, sometimes it's really difficult to tell at a glance. Oh, is that my unit? And you drag over and it's not, and sometimes it is, and sometimes you miss it. So personally, for me, that's a problem. It also makes missing something important easier. If you're concentrating somewhere else, trying to read a lot of information all at once, you could miss something that similar. Missiles are also a lot more powerful now because the lethality update. I love the lethality update. I think it's great. I don't think that units should have a health bar. I think it's a good intermediary way of fixing that problem. But they realise that missile spam is going to be really, really difficult to deal with, which is why unit sizes are sort of a lot lower, ideally. And in some cases, the missile units are even lower than infantry units that they support, which is completely ahistorical. The last thing I think, which is a big positive for historical battles, but isn't really explained, is the formations. Formations are extremely important in holding the battle line. A spear unit can easily lose a fight to a sword unit out of a holding formation, and at the same time can hold a sword unit for much, much longer if the formation is active, sometimes even defeating it because of morale drops or whatever happens. You have to learn quickly the power formations. You've got phalanx, you've got holding, you've got advance, you've got retreat. All these are fantastic and really should be talked about a lot more. The initiative that CA Sophia have put into this I think is really, really cool. For example, spear units are not for aggressive pushes like pikes were in the previous games. They have one job, and that's to hold the line for as long as possible, and in doing so tie down as many units, allowing your swords and other melee specialists to come around the flank and start cutting them down. And you have to learn that quickly in this game. Fast, low armoured infantry also play a crucial role in chasing down missile units because of a lack of cavalry, although you do have chariots as you progress through the game. So all in all, battles are frustrating because they often turn into indistinguishable mosh pits, and it can be hard to understand quickly what is going on without the obnoxious visual aids. But Unit Variety, in my opinion, is better than Three Kingdoms, where it's still very samey, at least at the beginning of the game, but we can forgive that. A lot of Total War games are like that. Without the formations, I would say the battles are pushing it a little bit, and once given access to heavier, more disciplined infantry, battles can become a lot more tactical rather than trying to pile units into prolonged engagements. So should you buy Total War Pharoah if you're on the fence? With the expanded campaign map and the greatly improved general campaign experience, I would recommend that you consider it, especially if it's still on sale, which it probably won't be by the time this video comes out, but when it does next, I would consider it. Considering this game, and this is going to sound crazy, started off at $60 without all this expansion, with just the base game, which wasn't great. It's an absolute rip-off, in fact. Anything below $30 is a reasonable price. The ironic thing is, if they'd released this game at the baseline $30, and they come out 8 months later or however with an expanded campaign for another $10, whatever, they'd be making $40 rather than the $26 they're making now for a brand new expansion. That's crazy. This situation could have been a lot different, so I hope CA has learnt not to take the consumer for granted in the future and to release full expansive games rather than trying to rip us off for a $60 half game. That's exactly why I didn't buy Total War Pharoah in the first place. I saw reviews, I looked at the game, I wasn't interested in the period, so you're gonna have to make me want to buy it. A lot of players aren't interested in this period, and so I could spend that $60 a lot more efficiently somewhere else. Nothing I saw on YouTube made me wanted to buy the game. I waited until all your local creators went out and reviewed the game, and none of it made me want to buy it. The battles looked uninspiring. The time period wasn't my favourite, so I didn't buy it. But if it was a $30 game, maybe on sale, plus the expansion could have been $15, I think I would have bought the expansion, to be honest with you. But I hope they've realised to release expansive games in full, or at least show us a roadmap, right, that's already pre-prepared, because otherwise players won't buy it. Because if this happens with a bigger title, Empire 2, Medieval 3, could be crippling for the company, for players not to buy after a huge amount of capital was invested into those kind of games. So learn from your mistakes, guys. This is actually a great expansion. I wish you'd just packaged it together in one game or told us about it earlier on. Thanks for watching. Drop a like and subscribe. I'll see you next time.